So today I'm covering the good, bad, and ugliest part of open source intelligence. What is open source intelligence is all about? It's the publicly available data. So they collect about an individual or an organization, actually, right? Like the register names, the company addresses, the company names, the company funding details, and all those stuff. Now I'll take deep into it. So there are two kinds of open source intelligent data that usually the people will leverage for good part of security assessments, and bad part is like the people will leverage by hackers. And so the ugliest part is, so there are a lot of nation state attackers that are using this data. The good part of, I'll cover all these three step by step. And so the first step is like, so the surface web, the surface web is all about searching data within the Google or any source, that is Bing or any other just search engines. Like you search about any company and the addresses, you go to the some of the funding information, who's their CTO, who's the CEO, all kind of a thing. So any data that is available in the internet, publicly accessible, that is called surface web OSINT sources. Anything that is available in the dark web, so dark web predominantly you can access via onion browsers actually. So like they trash about subdomains, the IP addresses, the DNS records. These are all things are stored there actually. So those are dark web OSINT sources. So I'll take you through some of the OSINT sources that predominantly, so how the hackers are leveraging it. And Shodan is one of the mother of the OSINT sources. So what Shodan does? Shodan is a search engine where it scans 24 bar 7. Okay, so whenever it has a scan frequency, and it scan for open webcams, the databases, industrial controllers, all the stuff, entire any digital asset that is not to internet. The Shodan is a scanner, is a type of a scanner where it scans the entire internet. It collects all the data and it collects the timestamps of it, and it does even network reconnaissance. As a part of network reconnaissance, it collects the IP addresses, ports, and SSL certificates, and service banners, HTTP banners, and many more. And is it legal to do that? So yes, the Shodan calls it is a passive data. Actually, they say it is illegal to collect. Who can access these data? Everyone with internet and credit card can use this particular data. And the census is another OSINT scanner where so the census will store this data up to 2 years. And census has a mechanism to scan the internet daily. And when compared to Shodan, the census has more accurate information about a port, because Shodan scans only top 100 ports or top 150 ports, but census scans top 1,000 ports of the 1,000 ports of all the IP addresses in the internet, actually. What are the practical uses for open source intelligence data? So predominantly open source intelligence data used for network reconnaissance or asset discovery or incident response. So, network reconnaissance means, again, the pen testers will use the data to collect the IP addresses, to collect the open ports, to get the what are all the digital assets out there. Actually, they call it as a reconnaissance. And the asset discovery, again, to collect the subdomain, to collect the SSL certificates. So by collecting data from the open source details, so that the pen testers or the security assessment people will come to know what and all the details are there. Sometimes what happens is, the organization doesn't maintain the full-fledged registry, so there will be a lot of shadow IT assets will be there. So OSINT, the practical uses of OSINT will rediscover that shadow IT assets. So that brings, so that brings back and visualization aspects actually, so that we can use those data in the incident response as well. So and they're typically some of the Scoring vendors, typically, so what are the technologies out there who's used leveraging this particular OS and data? That is predominantly risk scoring vendors. So what does risk scoring vendors does? Usually, risk scoring vendors like BitSight, a security scorecard. These are the risk scoring vendors where they put the risk rating about any of the organization. Let's say if an organization A is having a risk scores of 0 to 900, okay, so that way, so they will put a benchmark about how that particular organization is doing with this with the perspective of cybersecurity. Okay, so these security scoring vendors predominantly rely and they take data from these OSN sources. They predominantly go to the sensors data, they predominantly go to the host data, they predominantly go to the Shodan data, and they collect all the data. And whenever the Shodan census initiate the scan and the data is updated with their databases, respective databases, and these risk scoring vendors will fetch that particular data from those databases, so that if any accidental exposures it is happening on your databases, is there any malicious intents is there, uh, is there any IP addresses is been attacked by a malware, is there any SSH port is open or any ports is open, each and everything details will be there actually. So those details will be leveraged by these risk scoring vendors, and they will try to rate the organizations, saying that okay, so this company is bad, this company is good, this company is fantastic. So they'll put into three categories, and so they'll rate the organizations. And another technology and another major tools, so that they are depends upon this OS and sources, are like attack surface monitoring tools. We call it as an ASM. Probably now then EASM is a new extended version of the ASM. Again, so the ASM will leverage these OS and data to identify the subdomains, identify the SSL certificates, identify the DNS records. Again, identify the IP addresses. From there, what does an attack surface management tools does is they'll take the raw data from the OS and sources. From there, they'll construct, each assets. Let's say, so from the IP addresses they discovered, they see what are the cloud services. They see is there any server has been associated to it. Okay, what are the technologies in that particular server is used. So it's like taking all the data, so from the OSN sources and visualization, so and they make it visualize, and they track the changes. Let's say today, what is your organization? How many subdomains are coming up? How many subdomains are dismantled? How many new IP addresses are popping up? How many ports have been opened? So the attack surface monitoring tools, they continuously track about the data in the OSN sources, and they'll give the complete visualization about the organization, saying that what is good, what is bad, and how vulnerable your organization is. And the third technology that predominantly they use OSN sources is threat intel sources. Okay, this threat intel sources predominantly, there are a lot of threat actors are there in that, including the dark web forums, chat rooms and social media. So so they gather all the intelligence in the OSN sources, and they do a profiling, saying that who and all the guys, so discussing, some about any exploitation of around Microsoft, around Google, and all the stuff, and they will do a threat profiling. So based on that particular threat profiling, so this data will be visualized in the portal. So again, so this data is collected in the OSN sources, and they see in the entire internet, because they will get the threat intelligence platforms, they will sync the entire internet data. So they'll keep on seeing what are the intelligence, sorry, what are the attacks that is happening in the various organizations. So based on that, they will create an IOCs, indicators of compromises, and they'll collect the global botnets as well. And they'll collect all the global botnets, and they'll categorize, saying that okay, which all the category of a botnet leaks has been more infected on which country, based on that. And they see a lot of information in the internet about vulnerabilities and exploitation monitoring. And so they have an intelligence. So predominantly they taken it from the dark web monitoring forums, So they leverage the exploit scripts as well, actually. And how, so this is the good part of the OSINT sources. With the OSINT sources, so we can know our what is the what is our attack surface is all about. How our companies, what is the risk that is posed to our company, and what are the intelligence that we can get to as a company we can receive, actually. So this is the good part of OSINT sources. But so prominently OSINT sources nowadays using for pen testing, red teaming services as well, actually. But what is a bad part of OSINT sources? How hackers, it is just like a double-edged sword. Actually, we use it for a good intent. At the same time, hackers are leveraging the same data to hack into any of the organization. Actually, so what hackers are doing is they are doing a reconnaissance with this particular OSINT data. So where they go to the Shodan, they'll fetch all the IP addresses. They go to Shodan, they fetch all the subdomains. They'll go to security scorecard, and they'll get all the information about technologies and many things, actually, and they'll create a threat profile. Okay, so the threat profile about individual as an organization. Okay, sometimes hackers are leveraging even LinkedIn, and they will collect the official email addresses from the LinkedIn, and they'll collect the official information about what are their job roles and responsibilities and all those stuff. So once they create a threat profiling, they know so which company need to be attacked, actually. Let's say I want to attack an X company. I'll collect all the information that is required about that particular company. Who's the CEO? Who's the CFO? Where that company is there? Where the digital assets are being hosted? And what are their IP addresses? What are the subdomains? What are their DNS records and everything. Once I collect the complete information about, then and hackers are leveraging the the VA tools and publicly available VA tools. So these VA tools will give the versions of it, okay, all the databases and everything. Once they give the versions of it, they leverage the public databases, actually. So these public databases will give you a credentials, it's like a leak credentials or API keys that predominantly has been leaked by global scanners or nation state, nation state attackers. So these data they will leverage, and they'll try to attack of the organization. At the time when they predominantly what they do is they use the social engineering as an key for any of the attack. That's email is the number one uh, vector to breach any of the organization. And uh, and again, so they use it for vulnerability identifications. So since they already know what are the subdomains, what are the services are running, what are the versions of it, so they'll know, and they'll just go there to the dark web, and they'll pick up some of the scripts that can be executed on those vulnerable machines. That's how the software and hardware fingerprinting is done. Once they have done that hardware software fingerprinting, so they know exactly so which asset need to be exploited, or which asset are misconfigured. So they will exploit those misconfigurations, exactly. And at the time again, so they do a lot of planning and execution. So at the time of exploiting the data, so it is like they want to map the entire organization site, either the network mapping. Sometimes what they'll do is they do password spraying and credential stuffing attacks throughout organization. Okay, they will send one spear phishing email to all the employees saying that, okay, I'm giving an coupons. Okay, so so please to we are submitting a coupons, Amazon coupons as a Diwali gift. Please fill your details about something like that. They create a form, and they'll capture all these details. Okay, so and post exploitation. Okay, so once they get any of the laptop is got compromised, they'll try to maintain access by leveraging the golden ticket attacks, and by leveraging some of the active directory attacks, and they do lateral movements, actually. That's how they always cover their tracks, saying that, okay, because they are uh, compromising the legitimate endpoints. So the best examples that usually hackers they'll use is the sensor Shodan and Zoom I have I been found is one of the prominent tool where they always use it for leak credentials. So in GitHubs and pastebins, they'll get a lot of source codes, publicly accessible source codes, and Multicore is used for data visualization and gathering about various public sources. And the ugliest part of the OSINT sources, so we seen, okay, the people are using it for security assessments. That is a good part of it to test themselves. And the bad part of it, the hackers are using to breach any of the organization. The ugly part is there are a lot of nation state attackers are there. So these nation state attackers, actually what they are doing is they are hunting most vulnerable assets as the entire group. Actually, they go to Shodan and they'll take all the vulnerable assets. Let's say if any asset as a MongoDB public access, they'll collect all the data and they'll start writing a script. Okay, and that script has a capability to scan entire internet. They hunt for SSH ports in across the internet. They hunt for specific vulnerabilities. They hunt for a specific exploits actually. So that way, this OS based on this OS and sources, they'll do profiling. Based on the profiling, they'll take the entire batch of a data and they'll start a global wide attack. And this entire the process is automated, and it is these attacks are running at scale. So there is one the recent examples, if you see that there is a just a few days back, so there is an 0 day vulnerability came into the Microsoft actually. So that time, so the whole internet has been exploded because there's so many nation state attackers. They are scanning the whole internet because of that exploit isn't wild, because they have a public POC for that. So that way, it is we are not only the companies. So the organizations now has to be more careful of any vulnerability they leave behind to the internet. Actually, so this entire process, most of the nation state attackers are automated. So what are the impact? So this good, bad, and ugly part. What is the impact of the organizations today? Is so so it increases the attack surface. Okay, and so now it is not only hackers they see, the lot of scanners also seeing our data. So that is one of the bad part of it, and the speed of an attack. And today, uh, so the attacks are rapid actually. So you just put your any database open within hours, within days, just like it will be exploited. Okay, and is there any of the vulnerable component? So it is there in your organization, in our asset, digital asset that has been uh, faced to the public or to the internet. So that digital asset will be exploited by mass exploitations actually, because they're hackers are simultaneously targeting thousands of assets. So there again, so because of this there is an elevated, so it is very difficult for security teams to defend these kind of an attacks, because predominantly these attacks are coming from scanners, and it is very uh, difficult to defend. And the cost of remediations, whenever anybody hit with this kind of an attack, cost of remediations will goes high, as much as it's a skyrocketed, because these people will demand in a bitcoins. Now bitcoins is like a skyrocketed if each bitcoin, and again there are a lot of reputational damages and all those stuff. So this concludes my presentation about good, bad, and ugly part of OSN sources. I think Divyanshu, you can take it up.
Yes, Sudheer. Now we'll be talking about the next part. Well, I'll take you guys through the cloud OSINT. And before getting started, I just want to add, like as Sudheer said, is not something like any specific company wise, or it is these views are very generic, and like whatever we are expressing is not to target any specific organization. This is how usually attackers target, and like these are some ways which as a security engineers or the organizations you can know how what is your attack surface. So whatever Sudheer is added on the top of that, I'll add more things on the cloud side, because OSINT is a generic term and it is used for web as well as for the cloud and other applications. So I'll share my screen. I'll start from the cloud part. I hope my screen is visible. So let's get started. Before starting the cloud part, like when we do OSINT, what things you require, or what are the criteria for the cloud security? Maybe taking the top cloud providers like AWS. So is it not something? This is not something where you directly go and start exploiting a cloud provider. Obviously, they have security in place. Neither we are going to talk about a 0 day in the cloud. Is it is more like the misconfiguration. It is more like not following the best practices, which leads to the exposure or data leakage, which can be exploited by the attack. So the first thing is like obviously the showdown, where you can search about the data like S3 bucket or the endpoints of the organization, and from there you can identify what is their S3 bucket running, or what like how many clouds they are using. Are they using Azure cloud or GCP cloud? So this is similar to you searching for the SSL or like no similar things in the showdown. So I've on the right, if you'll see, I've given the query. This is how the query will look like. Obviously, you can go ahead and modify these queries. This is just for the reference. You can identify similar new issues or anything which is coming onto a cloud, maybe a document or a EMI or anything which is cloud specific. So you can try to search those domains, because these cloud providers, they expose their APIs, and you can talk to APIs and communicate. So suppose there is an S3 bucket and you know the name of that S3 bucket, it is easy for you to try to find whether that bucket is exposed or not. Or like if you know is it is Azure cloud, right? So you can target those clouds and try to find if a user credentials is leaked, as Sudhir said, like we initially try to find the leaked credentials for those organizations or the user. So similarly, we'll try to identify those things, and we'll perform a so like what will be the good side of this OSINT? Like you can easily identify what are your exposed buckets, what is your exposed data, your AMIs, your container images, your Kubernetes clusters, and whether they are publicly accessible or not, and how attackers can access it. Is it within your VPN? Is it within your VPCs, or is it publicly exposed? So it will help you to identify these things. Like there is one website called as Greyhead Warfare, which similar to Shodan, but performs scan on the S3 buckets. So it tries to identify and list all the buckets. It tries to brute force, and then it tries to find which buckets are public. So you can go and search on that. It is now a paid service, I think. Some part is free. Earlier it was a free service. So this is one easy way. You go to Greyhead Warfare and website, and you can try to search your organization name, search any specific bucket which might be public. So it depends. They might have old data. They might have not indexed it recently. So you have to validate. That's what no we will talk in the next slide. So before going to that, like these are some tools. AWS Recon and Cloud Mapper are the tools. So if you have no some idea, like you got okay, you got maybe a access key or the secret key or the account ID of an organization, what attacks you can try, what things you can try. So you can look into these tools. Obviously, for the because it's a slide, I'm just covering two tools. One is for AWS Recon, which recons the AWS, and second is the Cloud Mapper, which checks for the IAM permission. There are multiple tools like Paku and similar tools like AD Recon, which helps you on different cloud providers. So because AWS is the most common one, and that is where I do most of my OSINT. That's why I've added this. Next is like the bad part of OSINT. Since we have covered how it is good for us as an organization, how it is bad, and because now you'll see if I'll search, like if my organization is 1000 S3 buckets, or like cloud storage buckets, or the Azure blob. So how I'll figure out whether the specific Azure blob which is public is holding any sensitive data. because these blobs in storage and containers are used for hosting websites also. Like you can host a website on a S3 bucket. So if that bucket is public, there is like how you will identify just by looking into that the data it is having is the sensitive data. So obviously you have to go through each of the data and try to figure out, or like if the website is very huge, right? 1 GB or 2 GB for some, because in these storage you can store unlimited amount of data. So there is very false sense of security that if my if that X bucket is public, that means it is like leaking any sensitive data. Or if suppose I was not able to find that specific bucket via Shodan or Senses or by any means, that does not mean some other attacker or a bug bounty hunter cannot find it, because there are different ways. Some will try to find via these search engines, and others might try to find it via brute forcing the name. So if my organization is example.com, attackers can try to no enumerate via example dash one, example dash prod, example dash testing, and similar things, right? So you can see the attack surface is quite big, and like it is very much difficult as a organization to cover all the things. You might have to buy another tool which can like connect with your cloud account. So we are not talking about one or two cloud accounts. Organizations, they have more than 100 or 150 or like 500 accounts at a time. So how, as a person, as a single person, you can log in and like look for all those domains? That is not possible for humans, right? So for that, we have to rely on tool, and tool might have some issue. Like you have to correlate all things to make sure there is no false alert or a false positive, and whatever data you are getting is correct. So because we have to correlate both from the outside as well as from the inside, it makes things difficult. And talking about the OSINT, we are not just talking about the outside OSINT, that what attackers and organizations like no bug bounty hunters will do. It is also for the internal employee. Like, so suppose there is one sensitive data, maybe related to companies, or like salary slip of users stored in a S3 bucket. And as an internal employee, I know there is one bucket where is the data is stored, right? And I am able to dump that salary slips of all other employees. So now you can think, just from the outside, it is like one aspect, but also from the inside, it is a different aspect. So in cloud, we have to make sure we are monitoring and automating both for the outside and inside OS. So that's where you have to rely, like you can have false sense of security plus ethical considerations will come into picture. Like if you try to dump data out of an S3 bucket or a storage, you are basically not doing a passive recon. You are actively trying to dump a data which you might not be authorized, right? So you can definitely have a legal implications here. So earlier, AWS was even charging when you will try to do a query of an S3 bucket. So suppose as an attacker, you try to query my S3 bucket, okay, and even though you don't get anything, AWS was still charging. There's been a recent update where AWS stopped charging for the errors or no unauthorized S3 bucket access, or like when someone is trying to access a bucket and they are not allowed to access. So recently AWS made these changes. But if you think like 2 years ago, this was a use case. So as an attacker, what I can do, I can try to find a bucket. Okay, I cannot exploit your bucket. What I'll do, I'll try to brute force, I'll try to access it 1000 times, because I know AWS will charge you even when I'm not able to access the data. Even for access denied, AWS is going to charge you. It will cost you as a company, right? It will increase your bill for that S3 bucket. So these are some ways, and you can see on the right side we have some queries like for the blob you can do. For similarly for AWS, you can search for S3 Amazon AWS.com, and there are multiple tools for that. Like Cloud Dynamo is one service tool, which service discovery tool, which you can use it, and then you can correlate internally with these internal AWS accounts if you are doing it internally as a security engineer. So now coming to the ugly side, as I told you, that OSINT can highly be misused, and when someone is trying to exploit a bucket or AMI or some endpoint, maybe a load balancer, right? If we don't know what is my cloud surface and how much I am exposing outside, anyone can get inside, and because of the number of resources in the cloud, the number of services in the cloud, like one cloud like AWS is having 200 plus services. So now you can think, if I'm using 50 services and each of service might have some endpoint, some images, some load balancer, something, maybe a gateway service attached, S3 bucket. So you can think how big the infra would be, right? And on the top of that, if user has leaked a credential, maybe exposed their username and password, by which attacker, or like a user has is using a same username and password, like a password spraying attack, maybe organization using some kind of common format, or the users are using a common format, or via phishing. So these things we have to make sure as a security engineer or as an organization, you have to make sure all these things are covered when talking about cloud. So mostly cloud attacks happen because of OSINT only. Like as an attacker, first I'll try to enumerate your organization, and then I'll try to automate that stuff, and I'll try to dump a data. Recently, like since there is, I'll tell you a real story that recently I was able to identify a bucket for a AI company. So these days, because these AI companies are increasing, and like these companies are using some kind of S3 or a storage bucket, and because no people are not into cloud security, they don't know. It is easy for me to identify these buckets and dump their data and report to them. Obviously, this was part of a bug bounty program, so I reported this to the organization and found no got the bounty on that. But this is a generic scenario around right now around the world. So apart from storage, the technique I commonly use is publicly ECR images or the Docker images. So Docker and Kubernetes are container security or the container techniques which is used in the microservices these days. So because we are uploading these images, it is similar to how we store code in the GitHub. So similarly, you can store these container images, and if I have stored an image with a valid credential for my organization, maybe a GitHub token, maybe an AWS access key and secret key, it would be leaked to public, and anyone who will perform the scan on the top of this, like no, they will be able to exploit these services because of these compromised credentials. Next is publicly exposed AWS AMIs. So AMI is nothing but the image of your virtual or compute machines in the cloud. So suppose I am deploying Ubuntu server every day on my in my organization. So for that, I can have one image for my Ubuntu OS, which will be used for all my services across my cloud. So if suppose while creating that snapshot, I hard coded a credential and made that AWS AMI public, maybe for maybe let's suppose that if I'm an AWS user and I have a similar multiple AWS accounts where I want to use that same image, right? AMI image, AWS AMI image. So what will happen in that case? If some internal employee by mistakes make that AMI public instead of restricting it for other AWS accounts, what will happen? Anyone on the internet can search these AMIs. So these are directly, you can search these things directly via AWS. Like there is no separate portal or tool for that. You have to go to the public gallery for ECR, and you can search this AWS AMI directly from the AWS console. So these are some common techniques, which are very commonly exploited by attackers. You can similarly have the RDS snapshots, SSM snapshots, so these kind of S3 buckets. So now you can think there are so many cloud services which are exposing some kind of data. So this is not actually, I would say, a vulnerability. It is more of a misconfiguration which people are exploiting, or the attackers are exploiting. Because as an organization, there was no security engineer, or they were not aware about it. As companies are new startups are getting onboarded, they might not be aware about all security best practices in the cloud. And when you are talking about startups, they are very fast, or even bigger organizations, they have to work very fast. So in that process itself, they might miss some of the security, which can lead to these kind of misconfigurations. So that's what the is the ugly side of cloud OSing. And that is pretty much it from my side. Thank you. Now you guys can shoot up your questions. Sudheer and I can take the questions. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, our speakers. So everyone in the audience, I would request you, if you have any questions, you can write down in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. I'll unmute you, and then you can ask your question directly to the speaker. So right now, already we had one question. So I would like to address that. What are the open source intelligence tools available for GCP and Azure?
For Azure, you have a AD recon, which is one tool. You have Vajra, which is another tool. And similarly for GCP also, you have GCP recon, GCP pon, GCP cat. So these are different tools. I have one tool. So like it is not restricted to any tools. It will directly try to do a recon of what service or like of what organization you'll do. First, you have to identify the target, and then you try to run these tools. Or the best tools are Crawler and CS Speed, but they are considered as a vulnerability scanners for the or the misconfiguration scanners for the cloud. So it is not limited to any tool. Like it is not similar to web where you go and try to identify a directory listing or maybe a website with Jenkins or maybe some other service enabled. It is more on the cloud part. First, you identify a domain of the organization, example.com. Then on the top of that, you try to find the load balancers and maybe the account ID, usernames, and then Paku is one such tool which helps you in the enumeration, and it is for all three clouds like AWS, Azure, and GCP.
What tools are used for open source web hosting and email services and application services?
So web hosting, yeah, AWS is the best open source tool so that you can do web hosting. So if you create an account, so it will be free for one website.
So we have the next question. Please explain first level of defense and second level of defense, also how data in transit and at least taken care of and rest taken care of.
Your first level of defense, it comes under network part. It doesn't comes under OSINT source part because OSINT is predominantly an outside in approach. The first and second layer of a defenses that comes under gateway level. Yeah. So you need to have firewalls. You need to have APT systems for that, or otherwise secure web gateways. But those are the kind of solutions will give you defense.
How do you differentiate detection efficacy of open source intelligence versus paid?
So paid is all about visualization. So some of the paid tools will give you the asset that is not there in the open source data actually. So usually the paid tools, what is the advantage of using paid tools is like so they already integrated with 60 to 100 open source tools and open source OS and sources, so that no you get everything at one place. So that is an advantage of it. And there are some of the tools so where so even though they construct the data based on the open source data actually. So like CyberMindr, we construct data. So we'll take the IP addresses and we construct we check the net blocks and the ASN numbers and we'll discover additional IP addresses. That way we can construct the data that is not even there in the open source OSN sources, so that you can see the shadow IT assets in the organization.
For any fintech company, what are the security measures for cloud portal?
So any fintech company, so the cloud portal, it's like the first and foremost, you should have a WAF, web application firewalls. So that is a very mandatory because you're serving, via your application. Okay, and so the way you access to it to the cloud, so you need to access via private cloud access or something like that. So each and every user you connected to cloud, it to be authenticated and authorized, and you should not have a public access. That, as Divyanshu told, you should always monitor from the outside in a view and approach, saying that what are the changes that is happening in the entire cloud, saying that okay, is there anyone is creating any environmental files are leaking, is there any exposures are leaking. Developers will tend to a lot of mistakes. Okay, these mistakes should not turn into a breach. So you should not make your S3 bucket open, something like that. You have to always monitor from outside in, and you have to always so safeguard your inside out strategy as well. How against voice and misuse unethical practices? Yeah, so this is very good question. So organizations always has to be proactive, so where they have to monitor their entire digital surface whenever they are natting their IP addresses or servers, and they have to make sure that there should not be any vulnerabilities there. Because if you leave your vulnerabilities outside in the internet, then definitely the hacker will catch you, the global reconnaissance scanners will catch, and those vulnerabilities will never go away. because these OSINT sources, there is no way that you can keep, you can take out those records. So they will be there for life. Again, the risk scoring vendors will rate you bad. So and also, so you have to be very careful what you are natting it to internet, and so you have to keep your environment. You have to maintain some security hygiene.
Any open source tools to monitor hacking?
Yeah, like Shodan is there, census is there. So as we discussed, yeah.
How does open source intelligence ensure data accuracy and reliability?
Data accuracy and reliability you cannot achieve from the open source, because open source will have a periodic scans. Okay, so there are like some tools like a continuous threat exposure management tools. They will validate the data. So I think you need to subscribe to the CTM tools where, so they will validate the data and they will visualize it. What happens is you cannot get that accurate data saying that, because open source will constitute data that is at least right from yesterday to 10 years old. So there a lot of false positives will be there. There a lot of data might not be belongs to you, that belongs to you. It depends on. Is asking the database records is not showing any domain registry name. So that if we do, if any of the who's is not giving that domain registry name, that means that domain name is been redacted. So that means there is no way that you can get this details from any other source unless until you check. If you do an active scan and you check the banner, sometimes the same IP address will be used for in a net block. With that particular net block, you can pick up and you can see other name. So you have to correlate.
Answer for the any free OAPS tools to check top
Yeah,
10.
we
Yeah.
asked tools to check top 10 vulnerabilities. Burpsuit is a community edition. You can use it. Thank you. So is there anything is there? So just mail us.
So thank you, Sudheer. Thank you, Divyanshu, for such a wonderful session.